this series we'll build each kit from the Fantasy Village set by Battlesystems, discussing any construction pitfalls and build mistakes as well as kit-specific build tips and possible conversions. Once everything is built, we'll test a variety of methods to colour the edges of the terrain and then finally conclude with an in-depth overall review video of the whole fantasy terrain set. Follow along and consider subscribing if that sounds like something you don't want to miss. In this video we're going to go over a few build tips that will apply to pretty much all of the kits in this terrain system. It'll be a few tips that are quite handy to know before you really start building anything. Before we do that, I just want to discuss a few essential tools that you'll need when you're building these kits, and then a few optional tools which will be helpful but not totally essential. You'll either need some flat edge clippers or a scalpel. In the Battlesystems instructional videos they do use some flat edge clippers, but personally I prefer to use a scalpel. What I would say about that, and I'll mention it in all the videos that I use it, is you do really need to be quite careful with it, because you'll be using it in a way whereby you need to put quite a bit of pressure to cut through the card. So it'll be one of those situations where if you do slip and cut yourself, you'll cut yourself quite badly. So I really only recommend using a scalpel if you're confident using it. If not, just use some flat edge clippers, the kind of clippers that Games Workshop produces with a nice flat edge along one side. As far as optional tools go, you could maybe do with something like a ruler or some kind of really flat straight surface that you can use when you're bending the terrain along the creases. I didn't really do that on almost all the buildings that I built, and I kind of wish I had. Glue is another optional extra. These kits are designed really not to be glued. However, there's plenty of places where applying some glue won't get rid of the modularity of the system. It'll still allow you to unpack it if you want to take it apart. And if you're not planning to take it completely apart after each gaming session, then there'll be some areas whereby gluing the terrain will provide some additional stability, and in my opinion it actually looks better. And when we go through each of the kits, I'll explain the areas where I'm deciding to glue it, my reasoning for that, and then you'll be able to make a judgment whether you want to glue yours as well. So when it comes to glue, something like a strong hobby PVA is totally fine, or you could use a super glue. I had some mixed results with the super glue, but it might have been because my super glue was going off a little bit. Okay, so here's a few tips that I wish I'd known when I started. I say I wish I'd known when I started. I probably could have figured it out, but it's one of those things that you don't really appreciate it until you start going through and building things. So hopefully you guys can benefit from my experience here. My first tip is watch the Battlesystems instructional videos and watch them through fully before you start doing anything. I don't mean watch all of them, I mean watch their introductory video and then watch the video for the specific kit you're going to be putting together, because they're basically your instructions. And I'd also recommend watching my video for those kits, because I'll be pointing out some additional things that I noticed when I was putting those specific kits together, some things to look out for, things that are easy to break or bend or rip, and maybe some additional little tweaks that can help when you're putting them together. A generic tip for all of these kits is take extra care if the pieces are small. When you're creasing and folding, start by doing it a little bit less than you think you're going to need, especially with the roofs. I really can't stress that enough with the roofs. Don't over crease them. They will go back, but you really don't want to over bend and over crease things, because you can always add a bit more to the crease as you're going along. Real quick tip, which seems completely obvious now I'm thinking about it, but I made a mistake as I started going through, was be aware that the doors and the windows are only really designed to open in one direction. If the cut for the door or the window is on one side of your building, it will open the other side of the building away from the cut area. Even if you're being really careful, you will get some instances of the artwork surface ripping as you're popping out the pieces of the buildings from the frame. My only tip really is to be careful while you're doing this, but don't overly worry about it. I think this is where the glue comes in, and you will occasionally need to glue some of the printer surfaces back down. But as we go through each of the buildings, I will point out some areas that are more likely to get damaged as you're popping them out of the frames. So that's it for the general tips that apply to near enough all of the kits in this terrain system. We'll look at specific issues for specific kits when we build up each one. I'm planning to put out a video every single week until we've covered all of the kits in the fantasy village. Some of the kits, like the rivers and roads, we might not cover because they're really straightforward, and some of them, like the fences, graveyard, walls, they can be put into one video, a bit like the way that Battlesystems do in their official instruction videos. We'll be starting with the townhouse, so keep an eye out for that. Let me know in the comments below if you're following along with the build, or if you've got any particular tips or comments that you think other people that are looking to buy this terrain might benefit from. Then do leave a message in the comments below. I'm going to do a final review right at the end of the series, so I don't want to kind of start reviewing everything right now. But one thing I will say is that I did quite enjoy building these pieces of terrain, but there were some annoying aspects as well. So if this series sort of helps you avoid some of the more annoying things, then that's a job done, I suppose.